Welcome to the land of sand and suffering. Why life was brutal in ancient Egypt. Boring history for Woello again. Sleepy Traveler.tu, because tonight we're traveling back or way back. Before Netflix, before coffee, before flush toilets. To a time when life meant sand in your shoes, sun on your back, and scarabs in place. Welcome to ancient sounds majestic, right? Pyramids, gold, fair yeah, because behind all that glam was a brutal Let's set Thensi in Egypt was basically one long, dusty oven. You had the seasons, hot and dry, hot and kinda wet when the Nile flooded, and the Nile, that long, wiggly blue lifeline, was both your best friend and your worst enemy. It brought life, sure, it watered your crops and gave you fish, but if it flooded too much, your fields were toast, to little. Also toast, just drier. There were no weather apps, no flood warnings. Just you, your mud hut, and the gods, who weren't always in a helpful mood. Home sweet, mud, speaking of huts, if you were a regular person, and let's face it, you probably were, your house was a baked mud cube. One room, maybe two if you were fancy. No windows, just holes. No doors, just a cloth, and no toilets. We'll get to that nightmare later. You slept on woven mats, shared your space with your family, and possibly a few chickens, a goat, and a swarm of flies that refused to pay rent. No lights, no furniture, no privacy, just you, your neighbors, and the sound of someone coughing from across the street because they definitely had some mysterious desert lung disease. Again, beauty. And the smell, no. Don't get me wrong, the Egyptians tried to stay clean. They were into oils and perfumes. They even invented toothpaste, though it was mostly crushed rock and vinegar. So, don't try that at home. They shaved their heads to keep bugs away, wore linen to stay cool, which didn't really work but made them feel like it might. And they were obsessed with smelling nice, because, well, the desert is a sweaty place, but even with all that effort, the heat, the labor, the lack of plumbing, it all added up. You smelled like an ancient foot by the end of the day. A perfumed foot, maybe, but still, bread, beer, repeat. You're hungry now, right? Let's talk dinner. Everyday meals were consistent, bread and beer, beer and bread, sometimes onions, if it was a holiday, maybe a fig. If someone died and left you a goat in their will, you might even get meat, but mostly it was stone-ground bread that wore down your teeth like sandpaper, and beer so thick you practically chewed it. Delicious. Malnutrition was just part of the menu. Gods everywhere. Life in ancient Egypt was like living in a reality show where 2,000 gods judged your every move, stubbed your toe. That's probably because you forgot to thank the hippo goddess. Harvest failed. The crocodile god's mad. Your cat ran away. Clearly a punishment from BASTET. Everything had a divine reason, which sounds kind of comforting until you realize the gods could be real jerks. 1 minute they're blessing your crops, the next they're sending frogs and boils. So yeah, you prayed a lot just to stay on their good side. Life was short, like really short. The average Egyptian didn't live long. Childhood diseases, accidents, infections, wars, all lurking around every corner. And if you did manage to live past 40, you were basically a walking miracle. There were no hospitals, no doctors with degrees, just trial and error medicine and faith in magical spells written on crumbling papyrus. Broke a leg. Good luck. Got a fever. Better hope your neighbor knows a healing chant and has access to crushed ostrich eggs. otherwise ... Well, enjoy your trip to the afterlife. The great illusion. Here's the thing, sleepy listener. Ancient Egypt was brilliant at looking impressive. Massive pyramids, shiny gold, giant statues with majestic beards. But all that beauty was built on backs that bent under the sun, on lives lived quietly and often painfully behind the scenes. The average Egyptian didn't write history, they just survived it. So yes, Egypt was powerful, and yes, it gave us writing, architecture, medicine, and incredible art, but it also gave us a long list of reasons to not time travel there. Now, close your eyes. Can you hear the desert wind? The sound of sandals shuffling on stone, maybe a distant chant from a temple, or the splash of an oar on the Nile. You're safe here, wrapped in your blanket, not a single beetle in sight. But remember, just a few thousand years ago, someone not so different from you was falling asleep under the same stars, only their bed was made of straw, and their pillow, probably a rock. And they had to be up at dawn. To carry bricks. Again. Born into the Nile. Childhood in ancient Egypt. From why life was brutal in ancient Egypt. Hey there. Sleepyhead. Still here. That's impressive. Most people would have fled the second I mentioned beetles. But you're brave. Or just really trying to fall asleep. Either way, welcome back. Tonight, we're going to meet someone new. A little someone. Because before you could become an overworked adult in ancient Egypt, you had to survive childhood. Which sounds fun. Right. Running barefoot by the Nile, making up games, maybe petting a sacred cat. Yeah. No. This wasn't Saturday morning cartoons. This was survive your own birth, dodge a crocodile, eat your beer mush kind of childhood. Let's meet. Let's call him Kepi. He's 6 years old. He's got a shaved head, a pet duck, and dirt permanently under his fingernails. Let's follow his day. The wake-up call, roosters, and siblings. Kepi doesn't have an alarm clock. He has noise. Loud noise, his baby brother's crying, his neighbor's goat is yelling, and his mom is already outside shouting at the bread oven. It's barely dawn, and the desert is awake. He stretches on his mat, rolls over, and sand in the mouth again. Classic. No pajamas, by the way, just a linen loincloth and whatever sleep-crusted agu he hasn't wiped away yet. Breakfast of ancient champions. What's for breakfast? Bread, again. Flat, chewy, slightly sandy bread. And a watered-down cup of beer. Not the fun kind. This is baby beer, full of calories and little floaty bits. Think of it as Egyptian oatmeal. But with more fermentation. There's no cereal, no milk, no fruit smoothie. Just chewy carbs and vibes. If his family's lucky, there might be an onion to nibble on. If not, tough. School, not unless you're fancy. No. This is where things split. If Kepi's dad is a priest or scribe, maybe little Kepi is headed to school today, a dusty courtyard school where he'll sit cross-legged and practice drawing tiny birds and squiggly snakes, aka hieroglyphs, on clay shards. The teacher, an old man with a stick and zero patience, but more likely, Kepi's family are workers, so there's no school, no books, just a lifetime internship in learning to haul things and avoid the sun. His classroom, the backyard, his homework. Don't fall in the river. Toys, games, and small brews sake. It's not all doom and chores. Kids did have fun. Sometimes. Kepi and his friends might play tug-of-war, wrestle in the dust, or kick around a ball made of linen stuffed with reeds. There were toys, too, clay animals, wooden dolls, spinning tops. One rich kid even had a toy crocodile with moving jaws. Jealous, but safety, that wasn't invented yet. So, if you trip and fall, it's not a band-aid. It's rub some sand on it and don't cry in front of the gods. Ancient childhood threats, they're not cute so. About those dangers, Kepi has to avoid. Falling into irrigation canals, being kicked by a donkey, random fevers that no one understands, flies, so many flies, scorpions hiding in his blanket, and crocodiles, because of course the Nile has crocodiles. There's also the very real threat of getting lost in a festival crowd, or being snatched by a wandering god disguised as a goose. It was a weird time for religion. No pressure. Kepi. Hygiene-ish bath time. That's complicated. People tried to stay clean. They washed with Nile water and scrubbed it with natron salt. Kids were often shaved bald to keep lice away. Only a single braid left hanging for style and probably sunburn. But between the heat, the dust, and communal everything, let's just say hygiene was more of a suggestion than a guarantee. Cats, ducks, and sacred cows. Kepi might have a pet. Egyptians loved animals. Cats were sacred, believed to be magical protectors. Dogs were guards and hunting buddies. Ducks waddled around like they owned the place. There were monkeys, too, sometimes even pet baboons, which is fun until they steal your bread. So, if Kepi is chasing geese or throwing pebbles into the canal, he's probably cuddling a half-wild kitten that may or may not bite his toe in the night, helping around the home by age 6. Kepi's already helping his mom with chores, carrying water jugs from the well, sweeping sand out of the hut, pointless, but therapeutic, helping bake the bread. Or at least not eat it before dinner. If he messes up, he gets yelled at. If he does well, he gets yelled at less. Progress. There are no gold stars, just survival. Sunset and story as the sun drops and the heat fades. Kepi curls up on his mat. He listens to his grandma mumble stories about gods, monsters, and magical scarabs that eat nightmares. He doesn't have a pillow, but he does have his duck, sleeping nearby with one foot in a bowl. He's scratched, sunburned, full of bread, and dreaming of being a fisherman. Or maybe a chariot driver. Or maybe just someone who gets to wear real shoes one day. The daily grind, work life under the sun from why life was brutal in ancient Egypt. Hey again, dreamy drifter. Hope you're still cozy. Maybe wrapped up like a comfy little mummy. Minus the curses, because tonight we're clocking in. No sandals, no breaks, and definitely no unions. Welcome to the work life of ancient Egypt. You've met little Kepi, cute, dusty, and mostly harmless. But tonight, we're following his older cousin, Mena, a 17-year-old with muscles, a sunburn, and a job he didn't exactly apply for. Because when your dad's a worker and your granddad was a worker, guess what? You're a worker, too. Let's walk a mile in his sandals. And by walk, I mean carry 60 pounds of bricks in 45-degree heat. Sunrise equals shift time. Mena wakes up before the sun. Not because he's a morning person, because his boss is. The overseer yells through the village. Time to move, lazy bones. Except in ancient Egyptian, which sounds slightly more dramatic, Mena stretches, throws on a linen kilt, drinks a cup of leftover beer mush, and grabs his work tools, a chisel, a wooden mallet, and a small clay amulet shaped like a frog. For luck, he'll need it. By the time the sun peeks over the dunes, he's already halfway to the site. So, what is the job? Mena's been assigned to brick hauling. Sounds simple, It's not. First, he stomps mud and straw together with his feet. Then he packs it into wooden molds, waits for it to dry, then stacks the bricks, carries them, then stacks them again, and again. And again. It's less creative building and more back-breaking repetition with bonus sweat. Some days he helps dig irrigation canals or drag heavy stones using ropes that dig into his hands. Other days he's cutting limestone with copper tools that dull instantly and require constant sharpening. Nothing is light. Everything is hot, and the supervisor, always shouting, "But at least you're getting paid." Sort of. Many gets paid in rations, bread, beer, maybe some onions, and once a week, if the gods are kind, fish that's it. No gold coins. No overtime pay. No employee of the month scarab. Just carbs and calories to keep him alive for another shift. And if rations run low, you still show up. Or face punishment, like extra shifts, whippings, or losing what little food you get. The heat is real. Forget modern-day summer complaints. Ancient Egypt was an open-air oven. Mena works under the brutal sun, with no hat, no sunscreen, and only a damp cloth over his shoulders to stop the worst of it. It doesn't help much. Dehydration? Constant. Blisters? Absolutely. Sunburn? Oh, yes, every hour or so. Someone faints. No one stops. The work goes on, because there's a quota to hit, a wall to build, a tomb to finish before the rich guy dies, and guess who doesn't care if your sandal broke? Dangerous tools, angry animals, and weird hazards. Work sites in ancient Egypt were full of hazards. Trip over a rope. Ankle gone. Get your finger crushed between stones. Good luck. Step on a scorpion. It's not going to end well. Breathe in limestone dust all day. Say hello to ancient lung rot. Also, donkeys. Angry ones. They carried supplies, but had a habit of kicking at random. More than one worker lost a tooth to a rogue donkey named Bibi. Rip Menace front tooth. We hardly knew ye. Living on Sitasama times, workers like Mena had to live at the job site, in dusty little labor villages built near major construction zones, like Deir el-Medina. Sounds kind of cozy. Right. It wasn't. Crammed huts, shared latrines, gossip, noise, mosquitoes, and a strict work schedule. At night, there were campfires. Sure, but also sore muscles, snoring co-workers, and the constant threat of being volunteered for a night shift. If someone got injured or sick, they were local healers, with charms, prayers, and weird-smelling paste. But mostly, you just kept working. Complaints department. Good luck with that. Egyptians did complain. In fact, we found real letters from workers begging for their rations, calling out lazy foremen, or tattling on guys who faked injuries. One famous strike, the first labor strike in recorded history, happened under Pharaoh Ramses III. The workers building his tomb didn't get paid on time, so they dropped their tools and sat down in protest. Bold move, risky move. But hey, when the beer runs out, someone has to say something. Nightfall, ache and collapse after 12 hours of hauling, building, and being yelled at. Mena finally drags himself home. He eats bread, drinks thick beer, rests his swollen feet in a clay basin. Listens to his uncle complain about back pain. Again, there's no entertainment, no time. Just tired eyes and quiet prayers that the Nile behaves tomorrow, and that maybe, just maybe, he gets assigned to the less awful task of wall painting next week. Unlikely, but dreams are free. Pyramid building, not a dream job. From Why Life Was Brutal in Ancient Egypt. *K again. Sleepy soul, you've made it through childhood. survived your first job, and now you've been promoted to one of the most famous gigs in all of history, pyramid builder. Sounds epic, right? Big blocks, big monuments, big legacy. Except, well, it also meant blisters, bruises, back pain, and a lot of yelling. Tonight, we're strapping on our imaginary sandals, grabbing a copper chisel, and joining the workforce that built the giant triangles everyone still obsesses over. Let's find out what it really meant to be one of the so-called chosen builders of the gods. Spoiler, it was not a dream job. First things first, were they slaves? Let's bust a myth. No, most pyramid workers weren't slaves. Not in the movie version, whipped in chains kind of way. They were actually paid laborers, not well paid, mind you, but paid in rations, beer, and the promise of maybe not dying from heat stroke. Many were peasants working seasonal shifts during the Nile flood, when farming wasn't possible. Others were full-time skilled workers, stone cutters, masons, bakers, painters, rope guys, and log rollers. Still brutal, but not exactly a prison sentence. Just a really rough summer job that lasted for 20 years. So how do you build a pyramid? Step 1. Quarry blocks of limestone and granite, some weighing as much as 80 tons. Step 2. Haul them miles across sand, mud, and rocky terrain, using sleds, ropes, and angry encouragement from foremen. Step 3. Stack them perfectly, thousands of times, without cranes, without machines, and definitely without elevators. Now do it in the sun, in sandals, while dodging snakes and curses. Easy, right? Job titles you didn't ask for. Let's meet the crew. Stone hauler. Your job is to pull a rope, all day, every day. Your hands are calloused and your dreams are mostly about ice baths. Rope braider. You repair the ropes that keep snapping under the weight of giant stones. You are under constant pressure, much like the ropes. Mud lubricator. No, not a joke. Your job is to pour water or mud in front of sleds to help them slide better. You're basically a human slip-and-slide manager. Chisel sharpeners. You sit in the corner, sharpening dull copper tools non-stop while listening to grumbling and occasional crying. None of these jobs are glamorous. All of them will give you back problems, bread, beer, and blisters. Your daily wage. 3 loaves of bread to jugs of beer may be a dried fish if the supervisor's in a good mood. Gold. No camel rides. No thank you note from the pharaoh. Just enough calories to keep your legs moving and your spirit barely alive. And the bread wasn't soft and fluffy, either. It was coarse, full of grit from grinding stones, and it wore your teeth down faster than your soul. Danger everywhere. This job was dangerous. Stones could fall. Sleds could tip. You could trip on a loose log and end up under a 5-ton block. Heat stroke was common. So were infections, broken limbs, and wild animal encounters. There were no hard hats, no safety rails. Just sheer willpower and the occasional amulet to protect you from being crushed. Also, snakes. Did we mention snakes? The sleep situation if you were a full-time pyramid worker. You lived on site. Welcome to your new home, a crowded, sandy barracks with shared mats, loud snores, and flies. No pillows, no doors, just your coworkers, a clay bowl of mush, and a dream that maybe one day your back will stop hurting. It won't, but you can dream. You could complain. Kinda surprisingly, Egyptian workers had some rights. You could file a complaint if your beer rations weren't delivered. You could even strike, as mentioned before, but don't get carried away. Too much fuss, and you'd be reassigned to something worse, like grave digging, or crocodile duty. So most people, us, kept hauling. Why even do it? It wasn't just about surviving. For some, pyramid work meant pride, being part of something divine, building a monument that would last forever. Even if no one would ever remember your name, you might earn a tiny bit of prestige. Maybe your family got extra grain. Maybe the gods would notice your effort and bless your afterlife with fewer crocodile-headed judges. Or maybe you just didn't have a choice. Collapse and repeat at the end of the day. Your muscles screamed, your feet throbbed, and your mouth was full of dust. You curled up on a mat, next to 50 other snoring workers, dreaming of cool shade and endless beer. And when the sun rose again, you did it all over, for months, for years, until the monument was done, or you were the pharaoh, god, king, absolute drama queen from why life was brutal in ancient Egypt. Hey there, real dreamer. Tonight, we're stepping out of the dust and dirt of the worksite and into the glimmering, gold-covered world of Egypt's biggest diva. That's right, the pharaoh. Now, you might think being pharaoh meant a chill life of lounging in silk robes, pointing at pyramids, and yelling off with their heads whenever someone sneezed in your direction, and you'd be mostly right. But also, being pharaoh wasn't just luxury. It was pressure, it was drama, and it was pretending to be a god while managing crop taxes, avoiding curses, and trying not to get poisoned at dinner. So let's sneak into the sandals of one of history's most famous figures and find out why being the top banana wasn't all that relaxing. Pharaoh 101. The living god. First off, Pharaoh wasn't just king, he was considered a living god, the human form of horse on earth, the one who kept the Nile flowing, the sun rising, and the kingdom from falling apart. That's a lot of pressure for one guy who probably still needed help tying his sandals. If crops failed, people blamed the pharaoh. If a plague hit, pharaoh. If your cat went missing, still probably pharaoh's fault. No wonder so many of them ended up paranoid, eccentric, or, well, mummified with a lot of stress wrinkles. The outfit game was strong. Pharaohs dressed like someone who just won the world's weirdest fashion show. Leopard skin robes. Yes, bejeweled head dresses. Absolutely. False beards made of braided goat hair. You bet. Golden sandals. Oh yeah. And probably uncomfortable. And don't forget the iconic Nenes head cloth, that striped thing you see on King Tut's mask. It screamed, I am powerful, divine, and possibly overheating. Every outfit had meaning. Every accessory had a story, and you couldn't just throw on your casual linen tunic and call it a day. Nope. Dressing like a god was a full-time job. Palace life, gold walls, and zero privacy. Pharaohs lived in huge, lavish palaces full of servants, guards, advisors, and at least 5 people who existed just to carry their fan. But guess what? They had no privacy. Ever. Someone was always watching, praying to them, reporting to them, writing down their every word like it was sacred, even if all they said was, this bread is dry, and everything had to be perfect. The throne room, sparkling, the scribes, ready, the crocodile pool, cleaned, every single day. It was exhausting being fabulous. Bureaucracy. Running Egypt wasn't all feasts and falcon statues. The pharaoh was basically the CEO of the world's oldest mega corporation. He had to approve temple builds, organize trade with foreign lands, keep taxes flowing, manage harvests and droughts, worship about 42 gods daily, and not get assassinated by jealous unclesh. Had a lot of help. High priests, viziers, court officials, but at the end of the day, it was his name on the scroll. if something went wrong. It was his afterlife on the line. The drama never ends pharaohs weren't just leaders. They were magnets for drama. Take Akhenaten, for example. The guy who decided, out of nowhere, to cancel all the old gods and worship just one weird sun disk. People were not happy. Or Hatshepsut, a woman who ruled as pharaoh and even wore a false beard to keep up appearances. Total legend, but her stepson tried to erase her from history. Jealous much. Then there's Ramses II, built so many statues of himself that you'd think he invented selfies. And don't even get me started on Cleopatra. That's a whole bedtime series by itself. Family feuds and sibling fights. Buying Pharaoh didn't protect you from family drama. Sons plotted against fathers. Wives schemed against husbands. Brothers mysteriously disappeared. There were even cases of stepmothers marrying stepsons to stay in power. It was like a royal soap opera, but with more eyeliner and deadly cobras. Trust was rare. Loyalty was bought, and every smiling cousin at dinner might be slipping something into your wine. Death planning was a full-time job. Pharaohs started planning their funeral as soon as they got the crown. Why? Because the afterlife wasn't just important, it was everything. That meant building a massive tomb, stocking it with treasures, food, and tiny statues called ashabdi, writing spells and maps for the soul hiding the tomb so grave robbers didn't crash the party. Some pharaohs barely finished their tombs before dying. Others went way overboard, looking at you, pyramid guys, and still got robbed by the second Tuesday after burial. Tough crowd. Divine today, dust tomorrow. No matter how powerful the pharaoh was, he still ended up in a sarcophagus, sometimes with gold, sometimes with curses, sometimes with bad luck, like Tutankhamun, whose tomb stayed hidden for centuries, only to be opened by some Brits who didn't read the warning signs. The gods were tricky like that. Death was just the beginning, and it was complicated from why life was brutal in ancient Egypt. Hey again. Brave dreamer. Tonight, we're leaving the land of the living. Not in a spooky way. Don't worry. No jump scares here. Just in a very ancient Egyptian, overly complicated, bring your own amulet kind of way. Because in Egypt, dying was just the start of the paperwork. You didn't just croak and call it a day. No, no, no. You needed a plan, a budget, a team of priests, and at least one magical scroll to guide your soul through the world's weirdest obstacle course. Let's unravel this together. But not too fast. Mummies are fragile. So, you've died. Now what? First of all, sorry. You're dead. Maybe from a snake bite. Maybe just too many onions and not enough clean water. Whatever the case, your journey is just beginning. Your family calls in the morticians. They're not wearing black, they're wearing linen, and they're very enthusiastic about salt, mummification, salt, guts, and linen. Let's talk mummification, aka how to become a human raisin for the afterlife. Here's the short version. Remove the organs, all of them, through a tiny cut in your side. Yep. Store them in fancy jars, canopic jars, each guarded by a protective god with an animal head. Dog, baboon, falcon, and creepy-looking guy, fill your body with natron, a mix of salt and baking soda. Let it soak you up like a sponge for 40 days. Super comfy. Once you're dry and crispy, you get wrapped in linen. So much linen. Sometimes with amulets tucked in between layers, sometimes with prayers, sometimes with labels, so the gods don't get confused. Basically, you're a spiritual burrito. Extras, if you could afford them. If you were rich or just desperate to impress the gods, Your family could spring for the VIP package. Painted mask, gold toe caps, eye makeup on the outside of your eyelids still closed, a magical scarab shoved right over your heart to make sure it doesn't betray you later if you were poor. Sorry. You might get a quick pit burial with a bit of cloth and a prayer, someone muttered half-heartedly between chores. Even in death, class mattered. The Book of the Dead, not as metal as it sounds. You couldn't just wing it in the afterlife. No, you needed a guidebook. The Book of the Dead was a scroll full of spells, instructions, and illustrations for your journey. Sort of like Google Maps, but hand-drawn, extremely poetic, and full of crocodile-headed gatekeepers. Some of the spells had names like spell to avoid dying again, spell for not getting your head cut off, and the ever-liable spell for not being eaten by a snake thing with hippo legs. Catchy. Right. The weighing of the heart. No, for the final test. Once you've passed the river of fire, the cave of knives, and a hallway full of angry deities, you reach the hall of two truths. Here, the god Anubis places your heart on a scale. On the other side, a feather, the feather of Maat, goddess of truth. If your heart is light, meaning you weren't a total jerk, you pass. If it's heavy with lies, guilt, or too many stolen onions, you get eaten by Amit, part crocodile, part lion, part hippo, the ultimate no panimal. She just sits there, waiting to gobble up unworthy souls like ancient popcorn. No do-overs. Just chomp, and if you pass, congratulations. You made it to the field of reeds. Imagine the nicest version of Egypt: green fields, calm waters, gentle breezes, and infinite bread that doesn't taste like gravel. You get to farm forever, but without back pain. There are comfy chairs, maybe even shade, and your loved ones are there, too, unless they flunked the heart test, in which case, awkward. Tomb raids and afterlife heterochess. Even in death, peace wasn't guaranteed. If your tomb got robbed, which was extremely common, your mummy might end up tossed into a ditch, burned for fun, or sold for medicine. Ingredients: yes, really, ground-up mummy was used as a cure in medieval times. To prevent this, Egyptians booby-trapped tombs, cursed them, or made fake burial chambers to trick thieves. Still, tomb raiders were persistent. Gold's a strong motivator. Even in the desert, the helpers, Ushabti and amulets. Rich Egyptians packed their tombs with Ushabti, tiny worker statues that were supposed to magically come to life and do your chores in the afterlife. Need your fields plowed. Ushabti, want a beer brewed. Ushabti. They were basically ancient interns, but made of clay. And those amulets tucked in your wrappings. They protected you from evil snakes, sudden fireballs, and whatever else the underworld threw your way. You needed all the help you could get. Medicine in ancient Egypt. Just Nah, from why life was brutal in ancient Egypt. Hey there, sleepy traveler. Hope you're feeling healthy tonight, because if you'd been sick in ancient Egypt, you might not be so lucky. In this chapter, we're diving head first into ancient Egyptian medicine, a weird, brilliant, messy mix of magic spells, mashed plants, and just a tiny bit of lizard goo. Now, Egyptians were surprisingly advanced for their time. They had scrolls about surgeries. They knew about the pulse. They could reset a broken bone, but they also believed that disease came from angry gods, evil spirits, or, and this is not a joke, worms living in your stomach that whispered bad thoughts. So yeah, it's going to get wild. Doctors or sorcerers. If you were sick, you probably head to a temple instead of a hospital. There, a priest-physician? Yes, that's one job. Would ask the gods for help and also be rub some honey on your wound while chanting protective spells, because medicine was half science, half magic. You didn't just get a bandage. You got a spell book, an amulet, and some crocodile fat for good luck. It's like if your pharmacist was also your spiritual medium, your herbalist, and your therapist, all in one. The medical papyrus files Egyptians actually wrote down. Their treatments, two of the most famous medical scrolls, were the Ebers Papyrus, full of recipes for treating everything from splinters to demon possession, and the Edwin Smith Papyrus, surprisingly logical, with stuff like if the skull is crushed and brain is leaking, he will not survive. Spoiler, they were right. These papyri listed hundreds of cures, with instructions like grind, ostrich egg, mix with milk, apply to bald spot, 2 cure nightmares, drink beer and sleep on your left side. If bitten by a fly, smear with goose fat and recite the words, out, fly, out. That last one feels like ancient customer service. Honey, onion juice, and other delights. Talk ingredients. Egyptian medicine cabinets were unusual. Some greatest hits include honey, actually a solid choice, antibacterial, a plus. Onion juice, spicy, used for ear infections, stomach problems, and curses. Goose fat, rubbed on bruises or eaten for who knows what. Lizard blood, used for pimples or as part of a love potion. Yikes. Cow dung. Don't even ask. Used as a bandage sometimes. Probably not approved by modern dermatologists if it came out of an animal, got dug out of the earth, or smelled weird. Someone probably tried it as medicine. Toothaches. Say goodbye. Egyptians had a tough time with teeth. Their bread was full of sand and grit. So everyone basically sandpapered their molars 3 times a day. And guess what? No toothbrushes, no floss, no mini mouthwash. Just pain, crumbling teeth. And, occasionally, a chisel and hammer if a dentist got creative. If your tooth hurt, you might get a mixture of ground beans, frankincense, and crushed donkey hoof jammed into your gum. No wonder mummies were found with jaws locked in permanent grimaces. Magic was medicine. If the herbs didn't work, there was always magic. Spells were common, not just for healing, but for protection. Some examples: spell to stop a child from crying, spell for not getting bitten by a crocodile, and everyone's favorite, spell to prevent sudden collapse. You could also wear amulets, like the Eye of Horus, to protect your health and ward off evil spirits, because when in doubt, blame invisible forces. The real and fake surgery. Egyptians were surprisingly decent at fixing injuries. They could set broken bones, stitch up wounds, even perform trepanation, drilling a hole in the skull to let the evil spirits out or reduce swelling. But there's a catch. Most surgery was done without anesthesia, unless you count wine, or being knocked out with a heavy stick. So, if you needed a procedure, you either passed out from the pain, died of infection, or survived and became a local legend. Pregnancy problems and baby predictions. Let's say you were pregnant. In ancient Egypt, congratulations. Here's a pregnancy test. We're going to make you pee on barley seeds. If they sprout, you're pregnant. Seriously, that was the test. And weirdly, modern science says it sometimes worked, due to hormones in urine. To find out the baby's gender. Though, you'd have to wait. Or ask a priest to read your dreams or listen to how you sneezed. And during labor, no hospitals, just a birthing stool, midwives, and prayers to Taret, the hippo goddess of childbirth. Yes, a pregnant hippo was your divine birthing coach. Disease, demons, and dung beetles. Most diseases weren't blamed on germs. Those hadn't been discovered Yet instead, people believe sickness came from evil spirits, curses, or worms crawling into your belly to cause chow som treatments included swallowing amulets, chanting at your reflection in water, or rubbing mashed dates on your stomach and waiting for the evil to leave. You weren't just sick, you were being haunted by intestinal poltergeists. Fashion in the furnace, linen, wigs, and sweat from why life was brutal in ancient Egypt. Hello again, sleepy wanderer, still wrapped in your cozy blanket like a little linen mummy. Perfect, because tonight we're talking about fashion. Ancient Egyptian fashion, to be exact, which sounds elegant until you realize they were dressing for a climate that basically felt like a toaster oven taped to your face. So how did they stay cool? How did they show off? And most importantly, why were so many things see-through? Let's get dressed. Ancient Egypt style. It's hot. Really hot. First things first. Egypt is hot and dry and dusty and full of sun that never quits. Imagine living in a place where your clothes aren't about style. They're about survival. You don't need coats or sweaters or pants. What you need is linen. Lots of linen. What did people wear? Let's break it down by class and sass. Common men, a simple kilt, basically a wraparound skirt. Sometimes with a belt, sometimes not. No shirt. Why bother? Common women, a tight, ankle-length dress, often held up by shoulder straps. Still linen, still sweaty, still clinging to everything in the heat. Upper class, same shapes, but now we're adding pleats. Maybe some translucent layers, gold thread, beads, fringes, fancy sandals, and probably someone to fan them. Royalty. Now we're talking dramatic collars, bold makeup, embroidered sashes, and wigs so heavy you'd need a nap after putting one on. But even then, it was all still linen. It's the one fabric they could make, from flax plants, spun and woven and softened with spit. Yep, spit. Wigs, hot, heavy, and necessary hair in Egypt? Optional. Most people shaved it off. Lice were a huge issue, and the sun made having long hair a sweaty nightmare. The solution? Wigs. These weren't cheap Halloween ones, either. They were works of art, made of human hair, plant fibers, or sheep's wool braided, curled, and styled with beeswax decorated, with gold pins, perfumed cones, and sometimes flowers. Fancier your wig, the richer you probably were, and if you were pharaoh, your wig had its own fan club. Makeup forever. And Egyptians loved makeup, and not just for women. Men wore it too. Everyone did. It was stylish, spiritual, and protective. Here's what was in the beauty kit. Black coal eyeliner, made from lead and soot, believed to ward off evil, and sun glare. Green eyeshadow, from crushed malachite, to honor the gods. Red ochre rouge, for lips and cheeks, made from clay and fat-scented oils, because no deodorant and sweat was everywhere. Wearing makeup wasn't vain, it was sacred. It showed respect to the gods. Also, it made your cheekbones pop. Sandals. Or barefoot. Most Egyptians went barefoot, but if you had sandals, you were doing well. Made from palm fiber, papyrus, or, if you were royalty, leather with gold inlays. But the sand was so hot, you could cook an egg on it. So sandals weren't just fashion, they were foot survival gear. Jewelry. The better. Jewelry wasn't optional. It was everywhere. Necklaces the size of dinner plates, rings on every finger, anklets, bracelets, and earrings that could double as home defense weapons. Even poor people wore amulets or clay beads if they could get them. Jewelry was beautiful, yes, but it was also magical. Every color, shape, and stone had a purpose. Blue for protection, green for rebirth, scarab beetles for luck, eyes of Horus for safe. So if you saw someone wearing 10 necklaces, they weren't overdressed. They were just being cautious. Let's talk cleanliness with all this heat, sweat, and sand. You'd think everyone was smelly? Right. Actually, no. Egyptians were obsessed with hygiene. They bathed daily or multiple times in the Nile, shaved their entire bodies. Yes. Everywhere rubbed themselves in oils and scented creams, used natron, the same stuff for mummies, as soap and deodorant. Even kids ran around naked until puberty. It was just too hot for anything else. Costumes and special fits for festivals, feasts, and ceremonies. Outfits got extra. Priests wore leopard skin capes, pharaohs wore striped crowns and fake beards, yes, even the queens, sometimes gods. Statues got dressed daily by temple staff, because fashion mattered in every Roman on big holidays. You might wear your best wig, paint your toenails, and douse yourself in lotus perfume so strong it could knock out a hippo. Pyramid life, sweat, stones, and sore backs from wildlife was brutal in ancient Egypt. Hey sleepyhead. Ready for a little light bedtime reading about hauling 2 ton stones under the boiling sun. Because tonight, we're headed to the desert to look at one of the biggest construction projects in history. The pyramids. They're massive, mysterious, and let's be honest, kind of exhausting just to think about. So how were they built? Who built them? And did anyone accidentally get flattened by a giant limestone block? Let's find out. First of all, who built the pyramids? Okay, let's clear this up right away. The pyramids were not built by slaves. That's an old myth. A popular one, but wrong. Most of the workers were skilled laborers, farmers, and craftsmen, regular Egyptians who helped during the Nile's flood season when their fields were underwater and there wasn't much to do. So Pharaoh was like, hey, no crops to grow. Cool, come move some rocks for me. And thousands said, sure, why not ruin my spine in exchange for bread and onions? Payment in carbs. These workers were chained up and whipped all day. They got paid with bread, beer about 4 liters a day, hydration, onions, fish, and sometimes a piece of beef if you were a boss level rock holiday. Lived in worker villages near the pyramid sites, with bakeries, breweries, and sleeping quarters. Still brutal work, though. Think back-breaking labor, no sunscreen, no steel tools, and dust in places you didn't know you had. The pyramid materials. Talk stones. The Great Pyramid of Giza is made from limestone, local granite from Aswan, 800 kilometers away, and 2.3 million blocks weighing up to 80 tons each. Just imagine trying to move a stone heavier than a school bus. Now do it ... to million more times. Casual, boats, ramps, and elbow greasesso. How did they move these stones? No cranes, no forklifts, no magic. Just wooden sleds dragged over sand, mud, and water poured on the sand to reduce friction. Massive ramps made of mud, brick, and stone, and boats for the long-distance granite, floating down the Nile like the world's slowest delivery service. Some ramps zigzagged up the sides. Others were straight on and long enough to build a freeway. But one thing's for sure, it was slow, sweaty work. How long did it take? The Great Pyramid took about 20 years to build. That's over 7,000 days or 175,000 hours of hauling, stacking, carving, measuring, and praying things didn't fall. Every block had to be perfectly placed, because if one angle was off, the whole thing could collapse into a very expensive pile of sadness. Inside the pyramid, you'd think the inside would be full of treasure. Right. Not really. The real purpose, a giant stone tomb for the pharaoh. Inside was a burial chamber, a big fancy coffin called a sarcophagus, possibly traps to stop tomb robbers. Spoiler, didn't work, and air shafts, or alien communication tubes. Depending on your favorite documentary, most of the treasure went in nearby tombs and was stolen within a few centuries because people are predictable. Dangers of the job being a pyramid builder wasn't all lunch breaks and beer. You faced crushed toes, sunstroke, collapsed ramps, and being yelled at by your supervisor for driving the sled slightly off course. Archaeologists have found injured skeletons, broken tools, and half-finished carvings. Proof that this was real, messy, human labor, not divine intervention. The team behind it wasn't just muscle. Pyramid projects had architects drawing things on papyrus and stressing over angles, engineers figuring out weight and slope, scribes keeping track of who showed up and who owed beer, cooks feeding the workforce, stone carvers shaping the blocks with copper chisels, and infinite patience. It was like a small city, all working for one giant triangle. Why even build these things? It's not just a flex, though it's kind of a flex. Pyramids were pathways to the afterlife. Pharaohs believed they'd become gods after death, but only if their body was preserved and buried in the right way. So they built massive tombs filled with sacred symbols, magical spells, food for the journey, and the occasional golden toilet brush. Okay, not really, but you get the idea. The view from the top today. The Great Pyramid of Giza is the last surviving wonder of the ancient world. It's weathered earthquakes, looters, sandstorms, and tourists with selfie sticks, and it still stands, a little crumbly, but still proud. Not bad for something built with no machines, no cement, and death and the afterlife, mummies, magic, and a hungry hippo god from why life was brutal in ancient Egypt. Asterisk, hey there, sleepy traveler. Tonight, we're going on a journey, but not just across a desert or into a tomb. We're going beyond, into the Egyptian afterlife. Because if there's one thing ancient Egyptians were very serious about, it was what happens after you die. And spoiler alert, it wasn't just resting in peace. No, you had to earn your way into the good place, and, failing that, well, there was a giant monster with the head of a crocodile waiting to eat your soul. So yeah, bedtime's about to get interesting. First comes death. Then the paperwork in Egypt. Death wasn't the end. It was more like stage 2. But getting into the afterlife wasn't automatic. You didn't just die and wake up in a field of flowers. Nope. You had to go through a cosmic obstacle course, complete with magical passwords, scary judges, and a final exam starring your own heartened. It all started with a good, old-fashioned mummification. Let's mummify you. So, you've died. Bummer. Time to prep your body for the long haul. Here's how the embalmers handled things. Wash the body in Nile water, remove the organs, lungs, stomach, liver, intestines, all packed in cute jars. Toss the brain through the nose. With a hook, seriously dry the body out with natron, a salty mix of baking soda and sand. Wrap it up like a human burrito with linen, amulets, and resin. Place in sarcophagus with inscriptions, curses, and a snack or two. Congrats, you're now a mummy, rigid, spicy, eternally ready. But the body's only half the story. Your soul has homework. The Egyptians believed in 5 parts of the soul, but let's focus on 2 important ones. The personality bit, often shown as a bird with your face, Ka, your life force, which still wanted to eat and chill. After death, to survive the afterlife, you needed your body intact, food offerings for your Ka, and daily visits from your Ba. which flapped in and out of the tomb like a ghostly pigeon. Basically, even dead. You were still busy. The Book of the Dead, aka Afterlife Instructions. You didn't just guess your way through the afterlife. You brought a cheat sheet. The Book of the Dead. Not a single book, actually, but a collection of spells, passwords, and rituals written on papyrus and buried with you. Like a cosmic fact for the deceased. It covered things like how to pass the gates, how to name the 40, to judges how to keep your heart from tattling, how to avoid being eaten by a soul-snacking monster. More on that in a sec. Basically, if you didn't study, you were toast. The weighing of the hearths is the big one. The final judgment. You arrive in the Hall of Mat, the goddess of truth and order. Here's what happens. Your heart is placed on a scale on the other side. A feather of Mat if your heart is lighter, meaning you lived a good life. You pass if it's heavier, full of guilt, lies, and bad vibes. Uohanner. Ammit, the devourer of souls. She's part lion, part hippo, part crocodile, basically a nightmare on 4 legs. If your heart fails the test, she eats it. Forever. No do-overs. No afterlife. Just deleted. Tough crowd. What's in the afterlife, if you did pass? Welcome to the field of reeds. It's like Egypt. But better. No taxes. No sandstorms. No sunburn. Just green fields, calm rivers, eternal food, and your favorite pets and family members. If they pass too, you could farm forever, but without blisters. Party with the gods, or float peacefully under palm trees. Basically, paradise, with more wheat. But it wasn't easy getting there. Along the journey to judgment, you had to navigate through gates guarded by fire-spitting serpents, answer riddles, avoid demons who tried to eat your shadow, cite your good deeds too. The 42 assessors, 1 for each Egyptian province, and just one wrong move. Boom. Ambushed by a chaos monster. Which is why people paid big money for better coffins, more spells, and professional mourners to cry extra loud, just in case the gods were listening. Death for the rich versus poor pharaohs. They had custom tombs, golden coffins, deluxe books of the dead, and temples in their honor. The poor, maybe a cheap coffin, or a hole in the sand. But no matter your status, the afterlife rules were the same. Even a pharaoh could be devoured by Ammit if his heart was too heavy. Even a farmer could reach paradise if he lived kindly. Fair, brutal, a little of both. Cursed tombs, ancient traps, and bad luck forever. From why life was brutal in ancient Egypt. Hey again, sleepy soul, you've braved the desert, hauled pyramid stones, and even faced a crocodile-headed soul leader. So what's next? Tonight, we tiptoe into the land of curses, traps, and really bad decisions, because when ancient Egyptians buried their dead, especially royalty, they really didn't want anyone poking around later. So they left behind warnings, seals, and in some cases, allegedly supernatural revenge mechanisms. And what did people do centuries later? They poked around anyway. Naturally. Why protect the tombs? Let's start with the basics. In ancient Egypt, your tomb wasn't just a place to lie down and rot. It was your eternal home, where your life force chilled, where your boss spirit bird dropped by, and where your carefully packed snacks and gold kept you comfy in the afterlife. So grave robbing. It wasn't just theft. It was soul sabotage. To protect the dead, tombs were hidden deep in rock or sand, sealed with curses or magic spells, sometimes booby-trapped, though maybe not with rolling boulders. Sorry, Indiana Jones, and yet the robbers came anyway. The curse is in the fine print. Some tombs included curse warnings, actual inscriptions on the walls like, All people who enter this tomb, I will wring their necks like a bird. Or, whoever disturbs the peace of the pharaoh shall lose his position and life, be devoured by crocodiles, and have no son to carry his name. Yikes, that's oddly specific. Now, were these real magical curses? Maybe not, but psychological warfare? Absolutely. If you're a tomb robber and you see that kind of threat carved into stone, you might think twice, or you might think, hey, what are the odds? Turns out, not great. The Great Pyramid. Rabadevin, the mighty Great Pyramid, wasn't safe. Despite all the guards, hidden chambers, and do not enter vibes, thieves got in a long time ago. Before archaeologists, before tourists, maybe even before the invention of the wheel, they tunneled, smashed, and snuck in to grab gold jewelry, sacred statues, and probably the pharaoh's favorite sandals. By the time modern teams got there, mostly empty. Enter Howard Carter, and the most famous curse. Let's fast forward to 1922. British archaeologist Howard Carter discovers the tomb of Tutankhamun, King Tut, perfectly sealed, untouched, full of gold, furniture, snacks, and a surprisingly small coffin for such a big deal. But not long after the tomb is opened, people start dying. Lord Carnarvon the Thunder dies from an infected mosquito bite. His dog dies the same hour, howling. Other visitors fall ill or suffer mysterious accidents. The press went wild. The curse of the pharaoh. Even Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes, blamed elemental spirits. Spooky. Sure, scientific. Maybe not, but the timing made people think twice. Was it real? Though, most experts say, probably not. The whole Tut's curse thing was a media invention. Great for headlines. Not so much for evidence. Some say mold, bacteria, or toxic gases in the sealed tombs might have caused illness. Others point out that many people who entered Tut's tomb lived long, normal lives, including Howard Carter himself. He lasted another 17 years. So was it a real curse? Or us, the world's most dramatic allergic reaction? You decide. Ancient booby traps. You've seen the movies. Spike pits. Poison darts. Snakes dropping from ceilings. But did ancient Egyptians really build traps into their tombs? Not really. Most traps were more like collapsing corridors, false walls, sand-blocked passages, big heavy stones that would fall and seal a room forever. More practical than flashy. And honestly, enough to ruin your day, especially if you are crawling through in the dark with nothing but a torch and greed. Valley of the Kings. Thieves versus Pharaohs. Be the new kingdom. Egyptians got smarter. They ditched the giant pyramids to obvious and started burying royalty in a secret valley carved into cliff faces. No giant triangle. No flashy markers. Lots of sandstone. This was the Valley of the Kings, final resting place for many pharaohs, including Tut. Still, tomb robbers got in. In fact, some tombs were looted during the reigns of the pharaohs themselves. Like, the paint hadn't even dried yet, and yet, the Egyptians kept trying. More seals, more guards, more prayers. And, of course, more curses, even in death. You weren't safe. Some tombs show signs of reburial, where priests or workers tried to hide royal mummies after robberies. Pharaohs like Ramesses II were moved from tomb to tomb like ancient refugees, wrapped in linens and stress. Why? Because, even in the afterlife, a pharaoh deserved peace, and no one wanted their ka being cranky for eternity. Ancient Egyptian medicine, good intentions, terrible tools from why life was brutal in ancient Egypt. Hello again, brave dreamer. Tonight, we're getting a check dash up dot, because if you were living in ancient Egypt, life was hard, the sun was brutal, the work was nonstop, and infections, constant companions. So, what did you do when your tooth ached, your bones broke, or a mysterious rash appeared where it definitely shouldn't? You went to an Egyptian doctor, of course, but before you relax, don't imagine a white coat, a stethoscope, or gentle hands. No. Imagine crocodile dung bandages, recipes written in bird symbols, and cures that sometimes involve screaming into jars. Welcome to ancient medicine, part science, part magic, mostly terrifying. Doctor, or priest, or both. In ancient Egypt, healing was a holy business. Doctors, called swunu, were often priests trained in temples. And medicine, it was a combo of herbal remedies, surgical techniques, magical spells, and instructions from gods like Thoth and Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of plagues. So yeah, you might get a prayer and a poultice, a chant and a laxative, double the treatment, double the confusion, the medical textbooks they were. Wild Egyptians actually wrote down a lot of their medical knowledge on papyrus scrolls. Some famous ones include the Edwin Smith Papyrus, mostly surgical stuff, very practical, the Ebers Papyrus, a whopping 700 plus remedies. Less practical, more questionable. These scrolls covered everything from setting bones, treating coughs, removing splinters, curing baldness with hippo fat. Obviously one charming spell reads, if you have a cough, recite this incantation into a jar of beer and drink it for 4 days. Modern medicine, eat your heart out. Their favorite ingredients, no thank you. Let's check out some of the ingredients in ancient cures. Honey. Okay, not bad. It's antibacterial. Garlic and onions, good for flavor and curses. Crocodile dung. Moving on lizard blood. For rashes, donkey milk. For wrinkles, rotten bread mold. Oddly effective against infections, proto-penicillin. Crushed beetles. Unclear purpose. Maybe just vibes. Look, they tried, and some of it did work, but a lot of it was creative. Surgery. Yep, ancient and painful Egyptians performed surgeries, not the gentle kind, though they could stitch wounds, remove abscesses, drain fluid, reset dislocated joints. But here's the thing, no anesthesia. Just grit your teeth and hope the priest doctor was having a good day. They even practiced trepanation, drilling into the skull to release pressure. Or evil spirits. Was it safe? Not really. Did people survive? Sometimes. Which is honestly impressive. Gynecology, pregnancy tests, and moriancy in Egyptian medicine wasn't just about bones and bugs. It also included some surprising methods for pregnancy and fertility. There. Pregnancy test. Women peed on wheat and barley seeds. If the seeds sprouted, they were pregnant. If wheat sprouted first, it was a girl. If barley sprouted, a boy. Believe it or not, this works sometimes. Science says there might be hormones in urine that affect seed growth. Modern lab tests just got humbled by ancient grain pea. Magic and medicine. No separation. Egyptians didn't separate the physical from the spiritual. So, if you had a headache, the treatment might include herbs, a poultice, a spoken charm invoking Thoth, a protective amulet shaped like an iant. If that didn't work, maybe it was a ghost, or an angry god, or a sneaky curse from your neighbor. Best to cover all the bases. Public health. Sort of. There wasn't a ministry of health, but Egypt did have some good practices. Cleanliness was encouraged. Priests bathed multiple times a day. Toilets existed. Basic, but functional sewage systems. Kinda. In temples, at least. Shaving body hair. helped prevent lice. Linen bandages. Sometimes even sterilesso. Yes, it wasn't all crocodile dung and chance. They had some smart ideas too. Hospitals. Kind of. Some temples doubled as houses of life. Part library, part clinic, part spiritual healing center. You could get diagnoses, spells, herbal cures, or just a quiet place to rest while someone rubbed you with scented oils and whispered prayerously, "That sounds kinda nice." Until they bring out the beetle paste, the most dangerous patients. The gods' wraths and diseases were believed to be divine punishment. If you were sick, it might mean you made the gods mad, you touched something cursed, or you were haunted by a ghost with unresolved germane. Those cases, no amount of garlic paste could save you. You needed an exorcism, or at least a really good spell. Daily life in ancient Egypt. Dust, bread, and a lot of beer from why life was brutal in ancient Egypt. Hey sleepy wander. Tonight, we're leaving the temples and tombs behind. No gods, no mummies, no magical amulets. Just regular life, which, in ancient Egypt, wasn't exactly a dream, because while the pharaohs got gold masks and secret tombs, the other 99% were waking up to sand in their teeth, back pain, and a breakfast of beer and bread. Yep, you heard that right. Beer for breakfast. Let's dive into what life was really like for the average Egyptian. Spoiler, it was dusty, noisy, and involved way to many onions. The average Egyptian home. Imagine a small mud brick house, one room, maybe two if you're fancy. No glass windows, just holes for air, and no AC, because the sun is trying to roast you alive. The walls, cracked, the roof, straw, the smell. A combo of sweat, animals, and whatever was cooking, probably garlic. Most homes had a sleeping mat, a clay oven, a few pots, some very worn sandals, and kids, always kids, running around and yelling. Privacy. Not really a thing. But hey, at least everyone was in the same smelly boat. Rise and shine. Way too early if they started with the sun, and not because people were morning people. It's just that by noon, the heat turned everything into an oven. So before the sun got too angry, people were fetching water from the Nile, grinding grain, mending clothes, making beer, chasing goats off the roof. Again, breakfast. Usually bread and beer, but not party beer. This was thick, porridgey stuff, barely fermented, kinda like soup. Sorta like sadness. Still, it was nutritious, and it kept people alive. So, bottoms up. Chores, and more chores. Forget TikTok and Netflix. And ancient Egyptians' free time was basically doing things you have to do so you don't die. That included grinding wheat, which took hours, fetching water in jars, heavy ones, making reed mats or sandals, cooking, which meant fire, smoke, and a lot of onions, washing clothes in the Nile with sand as detergent. Ouch, if you were lucky, you might get a break in the shade. If you were really lucky, maybe a small harp tune while you worked, but mostly, it was sweat, sand, and sore arms. Food, not fancy, but filling hers. What was on the daily menu? Bread, made from emmer wheat, full of grit and tiny pebbles. Thanks, grindstones. Beer, because water wasn't always safe. Onions and garlic, the flavor kings. Fava beans, for flatulence and protein. Dates and figs, nature's candy. Fish, if you lived near the Nile. Meat, maybe once a year, if there was a festival or you bribed a butcher. Dessert, maybe a honey cake on a feast day. Most days, just chew your dusty bread and be grateful. What did people wear? Linen, and more linen. It was breathable, simple, and didn't melt your skin in the heat. Men wore short kilt sandals or nothing, maybe some jewelry if they were feeling spicy. Women wore long dresses, beads, necklaces, and wigs if they could afford them. Kohl around the eyes, part beauty, part sun protection, part please stop judging me. Raw, children, usually naked, because why waste fabric on people who roll in the mud and pee on everything? Shopping in the markets were chaotic, noisy, and smelled like sweat, garlic, and goats. You could buy bread, onions, beer, pottery, and woven goods, fish, maybe still flopping spices and incense, amulets, and magic charms guaranteed. To maybe work, no coins. Egypt used a barter system. So, if you wanted a fish, you might offer a loaf of bread, a jug of beer, or your cousin's hand-woven basket. Negotiation was a skill, and also, probably, a source of daily arguments, kids, games, and ancient mischief. Egyptian kids were wild. When they weren't doing chores, they played ball games, Senate, a board game older than time, tug of war, or chasing each other with sticks. No tablets, no cartoons, just dirt, noise, and occasionally a scorpion. They also learned trades early. By age 7 or 8, most kids were already working as farmers in workshops or as apprentices to scribes or priests if you were lucky or literate. What about night time? Evenings were for eating leftovers, telling stories, praying to keep away spirits, rubbing sore feet, and falling asleep to the hum of insects and maybe someone arguing next door. No lights, no distractions, just the stars and the sound of a civilization snoring. And yes, let's talk toilets, bathrooms. Not great. Some homes had clay pots or sand-filled pits. Most people just used the outdoors, preferably away from the house. Toilet paper, nope, leaves, linen scraps, or your hand, followed by a Nile rinse. Let's just say, handshakes weren't a big thing. The workers, sweat, stone, and strikes in ancient Egypt. From why life was brutal in ancient Egypt. Hey there, night traveler, still awake. Good, because tonight we're going to work, and not just any work. We're joining the ancient Egyptian labor force, builders, diggers, painters, haulers, the sweaty backbone of the kingdom. You might think the pyramids were built by slaves. But nope, that's a myth. The real pyramid builders, regular Egyptians, skilled workers, paid with food, beer, and maybe a goat or two. So let's pull on our linen skirts, grab a copper chisel, and report for duty. The boss is watching, and you don't want to get docked on bread rations. First of all, no, they weren't slaves. Let's clear it up. Hollywood lied. Most workers who built the pyramids and temples weren't chained up or whipped. They were hired laborers, farmers during the flood season, craftsmen, and artisans. They lived in worker villages near the building sites. They got paid. They had homes. They even went on strike. Were the conditions brutal? Absolutely. But they weren't slaves. They were survivors. Nile floods equals construction time. Egypt's year had 3 seasons. Flooding, you can't farm. The land's underwater, planting, harvesting. So what do you do when you can't farm? You build pyramids. Of course, that's when the pharaoh would recruit people from all over Egypt. Tens of thousands of men, hauling, lifting, cutting, stacking. Your job might depend on your skill, your social status, or how unlucky you were that year. The jobs. Pick your pain. Let's see what roles were up for grabs on the Great Pyramid team. Stone haulers dragged multi-ton blocks on sleds across hot sand. Masons carved limestone and granite with copper tools and sore backs. Water carriers kept everyone hydrated and not dead. Food workers baking endless loaves and brewing beer barrels. Supervisors yelled a lot and pointed at things. Scribes recorded everything, from rations to how often you slacked a fee if you were lucky. You worked in the shade painting tomb walls. If not, you were sweating through your soul in the sun, wondering why stones are so heavy. Life at the work site. Workers stayed in purpose-built villages near the pyramids. They weren't glamorous, but they were better than sleeping in the sand. You got a mud brick home, a bed of straw, daily rations, beer, onions, and lots of bread. A team. You even had team names like Friends of Khufu or Drunk on the Job. Okay, maybe not that one. The work schedule, about 8 to 10 days on, 1 to 2 days off, like ancient shift work. You could visit your family between rotations. Paid in beer. No, really, forget direct deposit. Your salary came in the form of beer, thick, filling, full of calories, bread, coarse and chewy onions and garlic, medicine, food, and vampire repellent, sometimes meat. A treat if you worked hard or knew a guy. The better your skill, the better your rations. Master craftsmen could even afford jewelry or their own tomb. Imagine building a pyramid, and one day having a tiny one of your own. Tools of the true deadly didn't have steel, or power drills, or forklifts. Just copper chisels, soft and constantly breaking mallets, ropes, wooden sleds, water to wet the sand and reduce friction when dragging blocks, and human muscle. So much muscle. No gym memberships needed. Just 10 hours of dragging 2-ton rocks in the sun. Free tan. Permanent back problems. Strikes in the shadow of the pharaoh. You might think, who would dare protest in ancient Egypt? The answer: the workers at Deir al-Medina, a village of artisans who built the royal tombs. In 1152 BCE, they went on strike because they didn't get their rations. They stopped work, they sat down, and they demanded more bread and beer. And guess what? It worked. It's the earliest recorded strike in history. So the next time your boss ignores your email, just remember, ancient Egyptians literally stopped building tombs until they got paid. Iconic. The risk was real. Construction was dangerous. You could fall off scaffolding, get crushed by stone, cut yourself with a dull copper blade, get heat stroke, or die from sheer exhaustion. If that happened, sometimes you got buried near the site with a little grave marker, maybe some amulets, and a lot of sore muscles in the afterlife. But hey, you built that despite the danger. The workers left their mark. They wrote their names in hidden corners. They drew little doodles of cats, gods, and jokes on walls. They helped raise structures so massive we're still impressed today. And all that with no iron, no wheels, no blueprint software, just raw effort, back pain, and beer. Death for the commoner, dirt graves, tiny tombs, and hopeful hearts from why life was brutal in ancient Egypt. Hey again, sleepy traveler. Tonight, we take a quiet walk past the fields, beyond the workers' huts, and into a world every ancient Egyptian thought about constantly. Death. But don't worry, this isn't the gold mask, hidden chamber, booby-trapped kind of death. This is regular death, commoner death, the kind where your tomb was closer to a sandpit than a pyramid. Let's see what the afterlife looked like when you didn't have royal blood, but still had dreams of eternity. Spoiler, no gold, but a whole lot of heart. Everyone died. Not everyone got a Tom. Ancient Egyptians were obsessed with the afterlife, but only a lucky few got the royal treatment. For most people, no giant sarcophagus, no wall paintings, no mummy-making spa day. You might get a shallow pit in the ground, maybe some pottery, if your family had a bit of coin. A small mud brick tomb. If they didn't, well, they'd wrap you up, say a few words, and hoped the jackals stayed away. DIY funerals with embalmers or priests. Families had to figure things out. First, you'd get wrapped in linen or whatever cloth was available, sometimes placed in a reed coffin or clay pot, given a few small things for the afterlife: bread, beer, amulets, and onions. Yes, even in death, onions. Then buried in the desert sand, where the dry heat helps preserve your body. Naturally, it wasn't glamorous. But if done right, you still had a shot at the field of reeds. Egypt's paradise, grave goods. The original go-bag given the poorest Egyptians wanted to be ready for the afterlife. So into your grave went food offerings, stale bread. Still counts, beer jars if they didn't drink it first, amulets for protection, shabby dolls. Tiny helpers meant to do chores for you in the next life. Smart move, maybe a comb, or a mirror, or a favorite spoon. It wasn't much, but it was yours, and in the afterlife, even a dented pot meant something. The field of reeds. Death's dream. Lanthus was the goal, a peaceful, sunny place with green fields, cool breezes, eternal naps, and bottomless bread. But to get there, you had to pass the judgment of the heart, the weighing of the soul against a feather, the terrifying stare of Ammit, the soul leader, part lion, part hippo, part crocodile. No thanks if your heart was light and pure. Welcome to paradise. If not, chomp. No book of the dead. No problem. Sort of rich folks got scrolls full of spells and instructions for the afterlife. Poor folks, not so much. But that didn't stop them. They memorized prayers. They carved simple symbols. They begged the gods to listen. Some even scratched their names and helped me messages onto pottery shards or tomb walls, like cosmic post-it notes. Because in ancient Egypt, knowing your name in the afterlife was a big deal. If people forgot your name, you basically vanished forever. Yikes. No mummy budget. Nature's got U-turns out. Egypt's dry desert sand was the best embalmer around. Bodies buried directly in shallow graves were often naturally preserved. No fancy oils, no resin, just hot sun, dry wine, sand in every crevice. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. Some of the oldest preserved bodies we found, they weren't royal at all, just regular folks who happened to get buried in the right patch of dry dirt. So, location, location, location. Cemetery. Living and dying graves weren't always far from home. Sometimes, people were buried right next to the village, or even beneath the house floor. Imagine eating dinner with Uncle Ka buried under the tiles. Creepy, a little comforting. Also, yes, it kept ancestors close and gave you a daily reminder that you'd better live right, because the afterlife was always watching. Visiting the dead. Egyptians didn't forget their dead. Families would leave food at graves, pour beer on the dirt, talk to the spirit like it was still hanging around, even write letters asking for help. Hey grandma, please fix my love life. The dead were part of the family. And if you kept them happy, they might help you out from beyond. Or at least not haunt your goats, jackals, vultures, and the reality of sand graves. Sadly, not all graves stayed safe. Animals could dig them up. Thieves might steal your amulets, and sandstorms could erase your resting place entirely. But even then, Egyptians believed the soul could still find peace, as long as someone remembered your name and said a little prayer. Sometimes, that's all it took. The priests and the weird magic of ancient Egypt. From why life was brutal in ancient Egypt. Hello again. Nighttime traveler. You survived brutal labor, desert deaths, and a pyramid's worth of sand. Now let's get a little weird, because tonight, we're stepping into the sacred and slightly spooky world of ancient Egyptian priests and their magical lives. Spoiler, they weren't just bald guys mumbling in temples. They were doctors, dream interpreters, magicians, and sometimes a little bit terrifying. So fluff your pillow like it's a sacred scroll, and let's enter the temple of mystery. Meet the priests, bald, clean, and kinda powerful. First things first, the look. If you were a priest in ancient Egypt, you had to be bald, completely shaved. Even the eyebrows squeaky clean, multiple baths a day smelling like incense and possibly onions. Because purity mattered. You were handling the business of the gods. After all, can't show up stinky. Priests weren't always full-time, either. Many were rotating staff, like part-time divine workers. You might serve a month or two in the temple, then go back to farming. Holy side hustle. What did they do all day? Here's a priest's basic to-do list. Wake up before sunrise, bathe in sacred water, probably cold, dress in clean linen, feed the god's statue, yes. Really burn incense, perform chants, rituals, and wave some scepters around God's statues. Had their own rooms, their own clothes, and were treated like VIP guests. Feeding them wasn't symbolic. Priests actually prepared full meals, which later got eaten by the temple staff. So, divine leftovers, not a bad perk. Animal gods. Big energy. You've seen the statues. Falcon heads, jackal snouts, crocodile jaws. Egyptian priests weren't just praying to invisible forces. They were working with gods who had personalities, animal traits, and drama. Some of the biggest gods. Ra, sun god, boss of bosses. Osiris, god of the dead, always looking a little green. Thoth, ibis-headed god of writing and wisdom. Anubis, jackal-headed guide to the afterlife. Sekhmet, lion-headed goddess of war. Don't mess with her. Each had their own temple, priests, and rituals. Some even had living animal avatars, like a sacred bull or cat treated as royalty. Magic was real to them. Priests weren't just spiritual, they were magical. In fact, magic called Heka was a legit force, like gravity or sunlight. And priests, they were trained to control it. That meant reciting protective spells, making amulets, brewing potions, writing scrolls that could heal wounds or ward off demons, even casting love spells. Some things never change. Your average person might say a prayer, but if things got serious, sickness, curses, bad dreams, you went to the priest. He knew things. Ancient things, snake problems. There's a scroll for Theta. Egypt was crawling with danger, literal danger, like crocodiles, scorpions, snakes, malaria. Angry ghosts. Brias had spells for all of it. Bitten by a cobra. There's a chant for that. Haunted by your grumpy dead uncle. There's an amulet for that. In one spell, a priest calls on Isis to speak the true name of a poison and defeat it. Because in Egyptian magic, names had serious power. Potions, papyrus, and weird ingredients. Some common items in priestly magic: honey used for wounds, and sweet spells, natron, that salty stuff used in mummification and purification. Myrrh and frankincense makes everything smell fancier. Crocodile dung, yes. Don't ask. Hair clippings, nail trimmings, bits of papyrus, old sandals. Mix it all up, recite the right words, and boom, magical protection or diarrhea. Results may vary. Amulets, ancient accessories with attitude. If you are lucky, a priest would bless you with an amulet. Some popular ones: Eye of Horus, for health and healing; Scarab Beetle, for rebirth and good luck; Ankh, for eternal life; Jed Pillar, for stability like a cosmic back brace. These weren't fashion statements. They were powerful tools, charged with Heka and prayers. People wore them around their necks, buried them with the dead, or even baked them into bread. Don't try that now. The secret knowledge. Priests kept records, scrolls full of rituals, spells, and sacred lore. Not everyone could read them. Literacy was rare, so priests were also gatekeepers of knowledge. They knew the names of ancient gods, the right way to say a protective charm, which stars meant what, and how to handle a cursed object without summoning doom. Basically, priest equals walking library plus wizard plus life coach. Cross a priest. Not a great idea while most priests were healers and helpers. Some were feared. A priest who knew too much could curse you, or whisper your name in a spell that made your hair fall out. And if someone died suddenly, or got sick mysteriously, people might say, "Oof, must have annoyed a priest." Lesson: be nice to bald men with scrolls. Pharaoh's children, spoiled, schooled, and sometimes cursed from why life was brutal in ancient Egypt. Hello again, cozy listener. Tonight, we're leaving the temples behind and tiptoeing into something more delicate. Royal childhood, because being born into the palace didn't just mean golden toys and fancy sandals. It meant pressure, rules, politics, and sometimes a curse or two. Let's pull back the curtain and meet the tiny humans who were born into power, and often didn't survive it. Shh, keep your voice down. One of the princesses is trying to nap. Real babies, born with gold, swaddled in expectations. Being the child of a pharaoh was like being the child of a celebrity, CEO, and actual god, all at once. Your crib, probably carved from cedar and inlaid with ivory. Your clothes, linen so fine it floated. Your future, complicated, because your dad wasn't just the king. He was the living Horus, which meant your life was watched closely. Every step, every sniffle, every tantrum, political. Palace life was structured for running wild in the mud like regular kids. Pharaoh's children lived in private quarters with nannies, tutors, servants, scribes. Probably a cat or toy. They were expected to learn etiquette, no picking your nose during rituals, practice writing even if they'd never have to do it, study religion, myths, and how to sit like someone divine if you were a boy, future priest, general, or even pharaoh if you were a girl, marriage pawn in some political alliance, or a priestess, or great royal wife to your brother. Yes, that kind of brother. More on that later. How many kids did pharaohs have? Lot. Like, a lot. Pharaohs often had one official queen, the great royal wife, plus several minor wives, plus even more concubines. Had dozens of children, which made birthdays confusing, family dinners awkward, and succession battles very spicy. Let's just say the family tree looked more like a grapevine, tangled and slightly fermented. Real inbreeding, not breathers where it gets uncomfortable. To keep the bloodline pure, royal families often married within the family, sister and brother, uncle and niece, sometimes even father and daughter. This led to genetic issues. We're talking deformities, immune problems, and mysterious early deaths. Remember King Tut? He probably had a clubfoot, scoliosis, malaria, and a family tree with very few branches. Royal? Yes, healthy. Not always. Tutoring the tiny royals' education was serious business. Even if you were destined to rule, you still needed to know how to read and write, how to pray to the gods properly, how to address nobles without accidentally insulting their caste. Teachers were usually priests or scribes. They drill you on hieroglyphs, math, mythology, and probably how not to yawn in front of your dad's statue. Punishment likely included stern lectures, isolation, or just not getting your sweet date cake. Prince practiced saying princes didn't just study books. They trained like little warriors. They learned archery, chariot driving, sword fighting, how to look serious during military paradespouse. Someday, you might lead an army. Or at least pose dramatically in front of one for a temple wall carving, and that pouty face needs to say, I crush enemies and eat my lentils. Princess Protocol princes weren't exactly playing with dolls either. They trained in music, dance, religion, royal etiquette, flirting politely with foreign prince their main duty. Marriage diplomacy. One wrong eyebrow raise and your wedding might be cancelled, or worse, turned into a war. Many princesses married their own brothers to become queens, not for love, for dynasty maintenance. Gross, but strategic. Curses, sickness, and short lives. Being royal didn't protect you from ancient realities. Disease, accidents, snake bites, falling out of favor with the gods. Many royal children didn't live to adulthood. Tombs of tiny coffins tell stories of princes and princesses who barely made it past 5. And then there were the curses, whispered threats, jealous spells, or maybe just bad luck sealed into the family line. Because when your whole bloodline is divine, it's easy to make enemies, even magical ones, pets, toys, and rare smiles. But hey, it wasn't all doom and dynasty. Royal kids had pet monkeys, gazelles, cats, and eyeliner toys made from clay and wood, and probably the world's fanciest toy box. They were still children. They laughed, played, threw food, and begged not to go to lessons. Some even left little doodles behind, scratched into the palace walls. Proof that under all the gold and pressure, they were still us kids. Life in the shadows. Servants, scribes, and court survival from why life was brutal in ancient Egypt. Hey again, royal dreamer. So far, we've seen the mighty pharaoh, the high priests, and the awkward royal children. But tonight, we're going behind the scenes, deep into the busy, buzzing heart of the palace, because let's be real, while the pharaoh lounged on a throne, someone was sweating behind the curtain, making sure his sandals were polished and his grapes perfectly chilled. Welcome to the world of servants, scribes, and everyone else who kept the pharaoh's life smooth, while their own lives were anything but servants. The palace's silent force. Let's start with the basics. Pharaohs didn't do chores. They didn't fold linen, scrub floors, or refill the perfume bowls. Servants did. Lots of them. The royal palace was a maze of cleaners, cooks, linen washers, water carriers, wig stylists, featherfin wavers. Yes, that was a job, and these folks had to be quiet and visible. Perfect tone mistake, and boom, you're reassigned to latrine duty. Or worse, the crocodile ponds. Food for a god. Pharaoh didn't eat leftovers. His meals were carefully prepared, blessed by priests, plated like offerings to a deity, because technically, he was one. Cooks had to know how to bake perfect bread, pour beer without bubbles, cut cucumbers into divine shapes. Own legend says the kitchen workers whispered prayers into the stew. Whether it worked or not, it's the thought and spice that counts. Scribes, the human USB drive. Servants were the hands of the palace. Scribes were the brains. They could read and write hieroglyphs, keep records of crops, taxes, temple donations, copy magical spells without summoning the wrong demon. Being a scribe wasn't easy. You trained for years, hunched over papyrus scrolls, probably with ink-stained fingers and a headache from your teacher's stick. But it was one of the best jobs you could get if you weren't royalty. You didn't carry bricks or get sunburned. In the fields, you carried knowledge. Bureaucrats, the pharaoh's paperwork armor. Pharaoh might wave his hand and say, build me a temple. But who made that actually happen? His bureaucrats. These were the guys who drew up construction plans, calculated brick deliveries, handled workers' rations, argued about grain numbers. It wasn't glamorous, but it was powerful. Some bureaucrats became more feared than generals, especially if they controlled the royal treasury. Just don't lose a scroll. That's like ancient Egypt's version of leaking classified documents, dancers, musicians, and laughter insurance. Palaces weren't all serious business. They had entertainers too. The Netflix of the Nile. That meant harpist, flute, players, storytellers, acrobats, dancers with ankle bells, and yes, court dwarfs, who were believed to bring good fortune. These performers were often pampered, but also disposable. If you bored the pharaoh, he wouldn't give you a bad Yelp review. You just vanished from the lineup. High stakes, high kicks, spice and whispers. Life at court wasn't all dinner parties and sandal fittings. It was full of scheming whispers, backroom deals. Some servants were spies, paid to listen and report. Scribes might slip secrets into fake scrolls. Even perfume girls could be political pawns, placed there to gather dirt or deliver secret messages. So yeah, keep your gossip light and your enemies well fed. Hygiene crew. The smell warriors. Hygiene was a big deal. There were oil rubbers. They massaged the royals with scented oils, wig stylists, because even pharaohs were fancy fakes. Manicure experts. Nails were polished, not painted. Laundry teams. Linen had to be flawless. No creases, no sweat, and remember, this was all in 100 degrees Fahrenheit heat, with no deodorant or AC. These folks were the true unsung heroes of history. Bless the one who invented lotus-scented foot balm, slave labor, the dark reality. Not all servants were there by choice. Some were captives, debtors born into servitude. They worked the hardest jobs, grinding grain, hauling water, cleaning toilets, standing still for hours in temple procession. She weren't usually whipped daily. Ancient Egypt wasn't always as cruel as TV shows suggest, but freedom was rare, and rights almost non-existent. Life in the palace shadows could be glittering or grim. Survival in the palace jungle. Life at court was a game of survival. One bad rumor, you're out. Break a plate, you're cursed. Look at the queen the wrong way, you're definitely in trouble. But for some, it was worth the risk. You got better food, silkier beds, access to gossip, and maybe, just maybe, a shot at rising in rank. Some scribes became priests. Some servants married up, and a few entertainers even ended up in tomb paintings, immortalized forever for shaking a tambourine. Curses and tomb raiders. The dead were not left alone from why life was brutal in ancient Egypt. K. Sleepy one. Don't worry, there's no actual mummy creeping toward you. Probably. But tonight, we're diving into one of the most mysterious, thrilling, and oddly stressful parts of ancient Egyptian life. Death, or more specifically, what happened after death, and how even that wasn't peaceful, because in ancient Egypt, death wasn't the end. It was a new beginning, and as usual, there were rules, rituals, riches. And, unfortunately, people who really wanted to steal your stuff. Tombs, luxury real estate for the dead. If you were wealthy, or pharaoh rich, your tomb wasn't just a hole in the ground. It was a house, a shrine, a museum, and a giant treasure chest with your name on either side. You had food offerings, jewelry, furniture, clothes, your best makeup, your favorite board game, so lovingly placed to help you live it up in the afterlife. The idea was, if you had it in your tomb, you'd have it forever, unless, of course, someone stole it. Enter the tomb raiders and Hollywood ones, real ones, ancient ones. Tomb robbery wasn't a rare crime, it was practically a national epidemic. Why? Because pharaohs were buried with ridiculous amounts of gold. Their tombs were often advertisements for treasure. Giant statues, painted walls, fancy inscriptions. It was like putting a neon sign that said, "Very expensive stuff inside, please don't touch." Spoiler, people touched, the fear of the afterlife being interrupted. Ancient Egyptians believed if your body or tomb was messed with, your soul couldn't function in the afterlife. So imagine the horror. You're floating peacefully in the field of reeds, and suddenly your mummy's missing an arm, your amulets are gone, your nose is broken, and some guy is using your golden beard as a soup spoon. Not ideal. The curses, real or just marketing? You've probably heard of the mummy's curse, especially the one from Tutankhamun's tomb, where several people involved in its discovery died mysteriously. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe ancient Egypt's best defense system wasn't a trap door or a crocodile pit. It was fear. Some tombs had warnings carved into the walls, like, "He who disturbs this tomb will be devoured by the gods of the sky and earth," or worse, "Your family will be erased, your name forgotten." To an ancient Egyptian, that was terrifying. Being forgotten was basically the worst fate ever, like eternal social media deletion. How tomb robbers worked robbery wasn't just kicking down a wall and grabbing gold. It was a professional gig. Robbers studied tomb layouts, dug secret tunnels, worked at night, bribed guards, used tools like chisels, ropes, and lamps. Sometimes they were even the original builders. Who better to know where the good stuff was? And yeah, some were caught. We have ancient trial records where tomb robbers confessed under interrogation. Spoiler, confessions were often encouraged. The tomb police eyes, that was a thing. Entire squads of guards and inspectors were hired to monitor tombs, patch up damage, investigate missing items, write very dramatic reports. But there were two problems. They were often underpaid. They were sometimes in on the robbery. It's hard to guard a tomb when your cousin is already inside it, with a donkey cart. Valley of the Kings. Hotspot of ghostly break-ins. Valley of the Kings sounds peaceful. It's not. It was like the Beverly Hills of burial, reserved for the fanciest royals. But by the end of the New Kingdom, nearly every tomb had been looted. Even the mighty Ramses II. And what happened to their stuff? Melted down, sold, lost, scattered. Across the world, even today, museums hold bits and pieces of stolen tomb goods, now displayed under bright lights, far from the silence they were meant to rest in. What did Egypt try to stop it? Well, a lot. They hid tomb entrances, used fake burial chambers, built traps, sometimes placed armed guards, spread those creepy curses. They even moved royal mummies to secret storage rooms to protect them. That's how we found dozens of pharaohs together, jammed like sardines, in what's now called the Deir el-Bahari cache. Imagine opening a hidden shaft and finding 40 royal mummies just chilling. That's a horror movie. And a museum jackpot. Ghostly revenge. Now, the Egyptians definitely believed in the supernatural. So, if you robbed a tomb, you weren't just stealing gold. You risked being haunted, getting cursed, having your afterlife cancelled, and if the gods really wanted to mess with you, they'd erase your name from the scrolls of time. So yeah, you might end up rich, but also itchy, forever, with frogs in your bed and dreams of angry pharaohs chasing you. The end and beyond, judgment, heaven, and the 40 confessions from why life was brutal in ancient Egypt. *K. Sleepy Traveler. Welcome to the final stretch. We've wandered through the deserts, peeked into palaces, and even tiptoed past a few mummies. But tonight, we're going where every ancient Egyptian hoped to end up. Not just the afterlife, but the part after the afterlife. That's right. Judgment. You didn't just die and relax on a cloud. Nope. You had to pass tests, face gods, and read from a list longer than your grocery receipts. And if you failed, well, let's just say you weren't exactly reborn as a lotus flower. Welcome to the Hall of Two Truths, this, where your soul landed after death. Not a party. Not a beach. Not even a comfy ghost lounge. First, your your personality and your life force met up with your heart, which had been carefully preserved for this moment. Why not your brain? They threw that out. Apparently, your heart was the real hard drive. Anyway, your soul stood before a panel of 42 gods. Yes, 40-to each one representing a sin or moral code. This wasn't multiple choice. It was confession time, the 42 negative confessions. Instead of saying what you did, you had to say what you didn't do. Stuff like, I did not steal, I did not lie, I did not kill, I did not eavesdrop, I did not spit in the Nile, I did not make fun of the gods, I did not eat too much bread. Okay, not really, but close. Each god would listen. If they nodded, you moved on. If they frowned, better hope your heart was light. The weighing of the hearth moment of truth. Your heart was placed on a golden scale. On the other side, a feather. Not just any feather. The feather of Maat, goddess of truth and cosmic order. If your heart was lighter than the feather, congrats, you passed. Welcome to eternal paradise. If it was heavier, well, meet Ammit, the Devor. Ammit wasn't cuddly. She was part crocodile, lion, hippo, basically an ancient Egyptian nightmare blender. If your heart failed the test, Ammit ate it. No redo, no appeal, just chomp, and you were erased forever. No ghost, no spirit, not even a pyramid emoji to remember you by. Total spiritual delete. The field of reeds. Egyptian heaven assuming you pass go you. You got to enter the field of reeds. Ancient Egypt's version of paradise. What did it look like? Endless fields of crops, calm rivers, shade from palm trees, delicious food, and no tax collector Sayu could. Fish farm without breaking a sweat, hang out with loved ones, pet cats, chill forever. You'd even have servant statues called Ashabti to do chores for you. Yep, you could literally nap for eternity. Magic spells for the afterlife, but reaching all this wasn't automatic. That's where the Book of the Dead came in. It was like an afterlife instruction manual. What to say, what to wear, what spells to chant, what to do if a beetle god blocks your path. Some copies were hundreds of feet long, custom-made, filled with illustrations, and tucked into tombs, because hey, you don't want to mess up your one shot at forever. What if you couldn't afford all this? Let's be honest, not everyone had a book, a gold coffin, or 42 clean confessions. Poor Egyptians couldn't afford the fancy stuff. So they shared spells, used cheaper coffins, painted their own scrolls, buried Shapti dolls made of mud instead of jadebit. The belief, the hope, it was the same, that somehow, by living decently and honoring the gods, you'd find your way into the field of peace, even if your afterlife was budget-friendly. Names, memory, and being remembered. To the Egyptians, being remembered was everything. If no one spoke your name after you died, you disappeared, which is why names were carved on walls, statues were built, stories were passed one when poor people tried to get their names written somewhere, because memory kept you alive. And being forgotten, that was death twice. So maybe that's why we're still talking about these people, thousands of years later. In a weird way, we're keeping them alive, the eternal dream. So, dear listener, as you drift away under your cozy blanket, picture yourself walking beside a calm river, lotus flowers blooming, the sun warm but soft. No chores, no worries, just peace. Maybe you're holding a feather. Maybe your name is written in gold. Maybe your cat from 2000 BC is waiting for you under a sycamore tree, because in ancient Egypt, the afterlife wasn't a scary ending. It was a dream worth fighting and living for. Sleep well, eternal traveler, you made it.